What's going on, everybody? Kalibus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Cricket Innovate E5G and the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Cricket Innovate E5G, we're getting a 6.6-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 269, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. With the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G, we're getting a 6.5-inch 90Hz PLS TFT display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 270, and an aspect ratio of 20:9 as well. So in general, these displays are almost the same. Really, the only major difference between the two is that with the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G, we are getting a 90Hz display. Essentially, this is going to make the movement on the screen with the A13 5G a little bit faster and smoother. So if you're doing something like watching videos, playing games, stuff like that with a lot of motion on the screen, you will get a slightly better experience with the A13 5G, and it's going to feel more premium overall. But that being said, keep in mind, this is really a subtle difference. So in general, when you're actually using the phones, I feel like for the most part, these displays are pretty much going to be the same. And for that matter, at 6.6 inches versus 6.5 inches, the display on the Cricket Innovate E5G is actually slightly larger. So you might even get a better experience with this phone if you're doing something like reading, for example, where you just want things to be a little bit larger and easier to see. But at the end of the day, despite their really slight differences, I feel like these displays are pretty much the same. And while they're definitely not amazing or anything, for the entry-level phones they're really not bad. Now for storage here, both phones are getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. So in general, while it's not ideal in my opinion, it is at least acceptable. On one hand, in this day and age, with stuff like apps, the system, and just files in general getting larger and larger, I feel like especially for power users, 128GB would be a lot better. But overall, for the average user, as long as you're mindful of what you're actually putting on your phone, 64GB is at least acceptable. Now for security features, both phones do have Face Unlock, and they both have fingerprint scanners as well. With the Cricket Innovate E5G, it's right here on the back, and with the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G, it's right here on the power key. But that being said, starting with the Cricket Innovate E5G, let's go ahead and give them a try and see how well they work. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners worked real well, no issues at all. And again, remember, both phones do have Face Unlock as well, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, both phones have water drop notches on the front, and these cameras are 5 megapixels. Then on the back, with the Cricket Innovate E5G, we got a dual camera setup, with a 13 megapixel main camera and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G, we got a triple camera setup, with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, in terms of both features and quality, I definitely would say the A13 5G will have a huge advantage here. Not only does it have a macro camera, whereas the Cricket Innovate E5G doesn't, but in my experience, the camera features are just better. And in addition to this, it does take significantly better photos too. So if you are taking a lot of photos, maybe to share on social media for example, the A13 5G will be a much better choice. But if you're more of a casual camera user, and you're really just taking a couple photos here and there, and you're not too concerned about the quality as long as it's not terrible, then the Cricket Innovate E5G will still be perfectly fine. Now as far as RAM and processor go, these phones are actually the exact same here, with 4GB of RAM in the MediaTek Dimensity 700 processor. But that being said, despite having the same processor, for whatever reason, the Cricket Innovate E5G is actually a little bit faster. So if you're on your phone a little bit more, but still doing more basic activities like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music and stuff like that, then I would say in general, you will get a little bit of a better experience with the Cricket Innovate E5G. But that being said, the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G, while being a little bit slower, is still around the same level. So overall, for more basic activities, either of these phones will be perfectly fine. Now that being said, I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on them, and here the scores right here. Like I said, the Cricket Innovate E5G is a bit faster, but that being said, despite what this might suggest, in my experience it's not really that much faster. So the bottom line is, while again, when it comes to performance, you will get a better experience overall with the Cricket Innovate E5G, the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G still isn't quite as slow as it looks. Now as far as the battery goes, with the Cricket Innovate E5G, we're getting a 4000 mAh battery. This supports 10W fast charging, and the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G has a 5000 mAh battery. This supports 15W fast charging. So overall between the two, the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G obviously does have a huge advantage here, and you're going to get much better battery life. And not only that, but even though the fast charging is pretty close, the charging speeds with the A13 5G in general are a little bit better. Another thing I want to point out here is that with the Cricket Innovate E5G, this phone does not have wireless charging, and the reason I bring this up is because another another phone that's really similar to this one, the Cricket Dream 5G, does actually have wireless charging, so definitely don't get these two confused. And as for the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G, no Samsung Galaxy A series phone has wireless charging, so it probably isn't surprising that this phone doesn't either. Another thing to keep in mind here is that both phones do have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, then you'll be happy to know you can do that with either of these phones. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, these phones are so similar, it's really going to come down to what kind of deal you can get. There might be times where the Cricket Innovate E5G is free, but if they end up going for the same price, despite the difference in performance, I personally would still choose the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G just because it has a much better camera and a significantly larger battery. But that being said, again, the Cricket Innovate E5G is a little bit faster and the display is slightly larger. So at the end of the day, with these two phones, it really comes down to what features are more important to you. But in general, despite their differences, I do think for what they are, both of these phones are actually pretty good for the money. But this concludes my comparison between the Cricket Innovate E5G and the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G. Again, if you want to learn more about either of them individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. In addition to this, if you want to see the latest Cricket deals, I will be putting that in the description as well. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Khalipa's Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.